This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Thank you, Rabrani, for the warm introduction. Tiskel Mitzvahs for dedicating this Malava Malka. It should be Ilay Neshama to your father. Should be a Meilus Yosher for your whole family. For Besuras Toivos, Abi Eskel Tzedek. Rishus the Marada Asr Shlita. What a beautiful Maimon it is tonight. Sai by the Noshim, and now in the Beis Medrash. And my humble bracha to the Rav and to the whole Kehillah. They should continue to grow in Torah, Avodah, and L'Hagdol Torah L'Adira Ad Biyaskal Goel Tzedek. Tonight's Divrei Torah are dedicated anonymously, and the Rebbeinu Shalom should be mavarich this Torah Mishpacha for Simchas and Nachas, B'suras Toivos, Ad Biyaskal Tzedek. You know, there's a very challenging teaching. People have a very hard time with this Gemara. There are a lot of things people have an easier time with. This one is a tough one. Mishenichnas Adar Marbin B'Simcha. People they get very anxious when they hear they have to start being happy. You know, people, they enjoy being grouchy. You know, they get a kick out of it sometimes. You know, but when they say you have to be happy, they'd rather be grouchy. They actually are happier being grouchy. It gets them nervous. So the good news is, Reb Chaim Kanievsky says, Mishenichnas Adar Marbin B'Simcha. Don't worry, it doesn't start not until the second day Rosh Chodesh, because the first day Rosh Chodesh is already Shvat. Shvat, it's not Adar yet. Mishenichnas Adar doesn't begin till Shabbos, so you have the whole week you still have. But actually, if you look in the Ben Ish Chai, in the Sefer Adar Seliyah on Parshas Kisisa, Ben Ish Chai says, no, Mishenichnas Adar Marbin B'Simcha begins by the Moiled already. Already Thursday, Mishenichnas Adar Marbin B'Simcha. Rabbi Victor Nevensal says, no. It doesn't say when Adar begins. It says Mishenichnas. Mishenichnas already starts Shabbos Mevorchin Adar. Already today, we apply the rule Mishenichnas Adar Marbin B'Simcha. That's why, nothing in this world is coincidental. We hear terrible news on Thursday about the return of these babies, terrible, innocent children. That Klal Yisrael were hoping to hear that they would return alive. Nebuch, they were returned on Thursday. Why Thursday? By the way, even the president of Argentina decreed a national day of mourning because the family had citizenship in Argentina. So what does that mean if you're a Yid? If even in Argentina they feel a certain noisei ba'oil with a fellow citizen, how should a Yid feel? So the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted to make sure that bad news would come Thursday, before Mishenichnas Adar Marbin B'Simcha. Thursday was already the last day of the period of the year that began Mishenichnas Av Mematin B'Simcha. It ended L'chayra Thursday, because already Shabbos begins Mishenichnas Adar, and L'chayra Erev Shabbos as well. So all the bad news came out already last year, and Be'ezus Hashem, we hope, beginning today already, Rashi says, Mishenichnas Adar Marbin B'Simcha, Yimei Nisim Hayu Yisrael. So beginning today already begins miraculous times for Klal Yisrael. We should be Zoicha from here on in, only to see Nisim, Yeshuas, and Aflois, Lanu L'chol Yisrael. I want to take you to the end of the Megillah. There's a seemingly innocent pasuk at the end of the Megillah. The last parak of the Megillah. The last parak of the Megillah begins, Vayosem hamelech Achashverosh mas al haaretz v'yayam. Achashverosh taxed the people. And who cares that Achashverosh taxed the people? Why is it relevant that Achashverosh taxed the people? The very next pasuk is, you want to know the history of the Megillah, you want to know the palace intrigue, you want to know the politics. Got the wrong book. Haloi hema kesuvim b'sefer divrei hayamim l'malchei madai uparas. You got the wrong book. Go to the Chronicles of Persian Media. This book was written for one reason and one reason only. Persume Nisa. So why do I need to know Achashverosh taxed the people? So I looked around. The Brisker Rav asks the question. What's this doing in the Megillah? Why does the Megillah tell us Achashverosh taxed the people? I would like to present to you an original approach. And I think this approach will open up mamish a Pesach Oira in the entire Megillah Esther. You know, the Gemara Megillah points out that there's one extra word in the Megillah. It says that Achashverosh couldn't sleep one night. By the way, you know, a lot of people can't sleep. A lot of people, where Ronnie said that he was speaking about his father, that his father put in 100% of his effort, so when his head hit the pillow at night, he always fell asleep right away. But that's a rare thing. A lot of people have a hard time falling asleep at night. Actually, the Medrash says the reason Achashverosh had a hard time falling asleep is because Gabriel came and he knocked his head against the wall 366 times. Sleep experts have concluded it's very hard to sleep when a malach bangs your head against the wall 366 times. It could be very disturbing. And who's coming? Haman's coming. V'Haman ba lachatzar beis hamelach achitzayna leimar lamelach lislois es Mordechai al ha'etz. It should say asher heichin, on the tree that he prepared, but it doesn't say that. It says al ha'etz asher heichin loy, on the tree he prepared for him. That Haman prepared it for Mordechai. For the Gemara, the word loy is extra. Farштeitzach, Haman prepared it for Mordechai. It should say al ha'etz asher heichin. Says the Gemara, 3 words. Tana loy heichin. He thought he was preparing it for Mordechai. He was really preparing it for himself. By the way, the Belzer Rebbe says, how do Chazal know? Not just from the extra word. It says hachana. Hachana means hachana shel kedusha. Hachana is a mitzvah. What hachana shel mitzvah was Haman doing by making the tree? It was a hachana for the great mitzvah of Mechias Amalek. He must have been doing it for himself. If it says heichin, it must be he was doing it for himself. It's not just from the extra word loy. Okay. But this line of Gemara, Tana loy heichin, is not an isolated comment. It's like a bolt of lightning. You know, in the Gemara, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, whose yard site is always the week of Parshas Mishpatim, the Baalei Musar say, why is Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's yard site the week of Parshas Mishpatim? Because Rabbi Yisrael endeavored his whole life to elevate Dinei Choshen Mishpat to the same level as Dinei Yoredera and Dinei Arachayim. So he was nifter Parshas Mishpatim because this was a great contribution of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter would say every word of Chazal is like a bolt of lightning. What does that mean, like a bolt of lightning? We live in darkness, but when Chazal says something, it sheds so much light, but not just in this makom, it sheds light on the whole world. Chazal say that Haman was preparing the tree for himself. This is not just an isolated incident. This is a paradigm that we have to apply to the entire Purim story. I'll give you a few examples. In the beginning of the story, Achashverosh has a problem with his wife. He asks Vashti to come display herself. Vatimoyin hamalka Vashti. Now, I don't know if you know about the history of ancient kings, but back in the day, if you're the king of the world, you're King Henry, you're King James, you have a problem with your wife, there's a very simple solution. You make a new chasana the next day. That's how they did it. They didn't talk things out. They didn't go to therapists. They didn't discuss things. If the wife doesn't listen, that's how it worked. All of a sudden, Achashverosh is a progressive guy. He doesn't know what to do with his wife. So he brings the case. What's wrong with this guy? Why is he discussing this with the Congress? If his wife doesn't listen, he knows what to do. So the Vilna Gaon says the Megillah itself addresses this question. The next words in the Megillah are Kichein Devar Hamelach. Kichein Devar Hamelach means the law in Persia was that if something was relevant to the king himself, Lifnei kol yoidei das v'din, he could not make a unilateral decision. He had to bring it in front of the Congress. That's what the words mean. Kichein devar hamelech. If it's noigeya to the melech, the Gra says, Lifnei kol yoidei das v'din, he has to bring it to the Congress. So the kasha is, fast forward to the end of the story. Achashverosh is fuming at Haman. He goes outside. Meanwhile, Haman takes a misstep with Esther. He comes back into the palace. Achashverosh is fuming even more. Charvoina says, Gam hinei ha'etz. Look out the window. There's the gallows. What does Achashverosh say? Tulu alav. What do you mean Tulu alav? This is Nagea the king. How does he have a right to make a unilateral decision? Why doesn't he bring it to the Chachamim Yodei Ho'itim? What gives Achashverosh the right all of a sudden to make the decision on his own? Says the Gra. Because there was a guy in the palace who changed the law. You know what his name was? Vayomer Memuchan. So Memuchan made the following proposal. Yetzei Dvar Malchus Milafanav. That's a ridiculous law here in Persia, that you can call all the shots. You need to bring a question that's relevant to you in front of the Congress. From now on, I propose that you call all the shots. Yetzei Dvar Malchus Milafanav. You make the decision. So who's responsible that Achashverosh is able to knock off Haman unilaterally? Memuchan. Thank you very much, Haman. If not for you, you might still be around. You know, Achashverosh would have brought to the court. They would have had a split vote, and they would have given him 10 years and then probation or something. What allowed Achashverosh to knock off Haman was Haman. So al ho'etz asher lo heichin lo, he did it for himself. And there are many, many examples in the Megillah. Let me give you an open example the Stipler writes about in the Berchas Paratz. You have this adorable baby. He's floating in the Nile. His name is Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe. Little kid. His mother threw him in the Nile. Because the king of Egypt saw from the astrologers that the Moshiach Shel Yisrael was going to be born. So Pharoh decided he's going to put an end to any possibility of the Moshiach Shel Yisrael. I want to tell you something. A baby floating in the Nile, his life expectancy is about a few seconds. Now, I once spoke in Phoenix, Arizona. So they took me to a Makom, and I had over there an albino crocodile. You know an albino crocodile? So the trainer goes in. And the albino crocodile, he's sitting there like mamish ke'evan doimim. Like he's minding his own business, like ke'ilu he doesn't see what's going on. The trainer comes in, puts a stick of basar on a stick. The crocodile jumps 6 feet so quickly, he chaps the meat and is back in his place, ke'evan doimim, faster than your eye could take it in. You can't even see it, that's how fast he jumps. So if there's a baby floating in the Nile, there's no life expectancy. Pharoh said, we're going to put an end to the Moshiach Shel Yisrael. And what happens? His own daughter stretches out her arm, brings him into the palace. That night at 2 a.m., Pharoh can't sleep. He says, Basia, what's the noise in the next room? So I have a new baby. Where'd you get the baby? Not right now, not now. The baby's hungry. You want to go out to CVS and get some formula? So Pharoh says, okay, you're going to pay for it. No, Dad, put it on your American Express card. You pay for it. So Pharoh is raising Moshe Rabbeinu, is feeding Moshe Rabbeinu. You know, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't grow up with Klal Yisrael. Moshe grew up under Pharoh. You know, Ibn Ezra writes, Ibn Ezra's bothered. Why does Moshe Rabbeinu grow up in the palace? Why doesn't he grow up with the rest of the Yidden? Ibn Ezra writes that if Moshe Rabbeinu would have grown up with Klal Yisrael who were avadim, he would have had a slave mentality, he would have had low self-esteem, and he wouldn't have been the leader of Klal Yisrael. He couldn't have been a melech. He needed to grow up in royalty to be able to be the leader of the Jewish people. If not for Pharoh, there never would have been a Moshe. You know what it says in Pirkei Avos? Pharoh kibel Torah miSinai. No, it doesn't say that. But if not for Pharoh, Moshe never would have been Makabel Torah on Sinai. Pharoh thought he's going to put an end to the Moshiach Shel Yisrael. Pharoh groomed the Moshiach Shel Yisrael. Pharoh created the Moshiach Shel Yisrael. If we have a Malav Malka tonight, because we're celebrating the Torah of this Beis Medrash, we have to thank Pharoh. You have to have Hakaras HaTov to Pharoh. Echad mehem lo noisar. If not for Pharoh, we wouldn't be here today. That's the hashgacha, the Stipler writes, of how the Rebbeinu Shalom runs the world. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, I'm not afraid of the Rasha. You give me the Rasha, you give me his plans, I'll hijack the plan to bring about salvation for Klal Yisrael. There are many, many examples in the Megillah. We're limited on time. I'm going to take you straight to the end of the story. But you know, the Purim story doesn't end v'doiver shalom l'chol zarei. Because after Megillas Esther, Klal Yisrael decides they're going to go back to rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash. So if you look in Sefer Ezra, the Jewish people they dedicated themselves to rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash. The problem is they don't have money. They have no funding. So they send a letter to the king of Persia, named, who's the king of Persia at the time? Darius. Do us a favor, Darius. Would you kindly fund the building of the second Beis HaMikdash? So you know what the pasuk says in Ezra? It says Darius opens up the storehouses of the king, the storehouses of taxes, and he gives the money to the Jewish people to rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash. And I ask you, where did Darius get all this tax money from to help rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash? Vayasem hamelech Achashverosh mas al haaretz v'yeh. It came from his father's taxes. So look how the Purim story has come full circle. The story begins that Achashverosh has a Suda. What's he celebrating? He's celebrating that the Navi Yirmiyah said that the Beis HaMikdash will lay in ruins for 70 years, whereupon it will be rebuilt, and the 70 years were up. So Achashverosh said it hasn't been rebuilt, it will never be rebuilt. Achashverosh was celebrating what he thought was the eternal destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. And by the end of the story, Achashverosh has become the chief fundraiser to rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash. But it's much more than that. If you'd have asked Achashverosh, hey Achashverosh, pal, what are you celebrating here at this party? I'm celebrating the fact the Beis HaMikdash of the Jewish people will never be rebuilt. And the Rosh Hashanah is laughing. You're celebrating they'll never rebuilt? Just the opposite. You're going to call Vashti. She's not going to listen. You're going to kill her. You're going to marry Esther. You're going to have a kid. You're going to charge taxes. He's going to take all the money and rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash. You think this party is celebrating destruction? This is the first parlor meeting to help rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash. That's the Purim story full circle. It opens up celebrating it will never be rebuilt. By the end of the story, that very party has been the fundraiser to rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash. And don't think this is a manner of hashgacha that we find only in Megillas Esther. This is the hashgacha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses in the Galus in every single generation. I'll just give you a few examples. You ever hear of Lakewood Yeshiva? I didn't think so. Who built Lakewood? Yeah, close. Yeah, you're good. Everyone's going to say Rabbi Aaron Cutler. Okay, yeah, he had a big part of it. But let me explain a little bit. See, in 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella embarked on a program, something called Reconquesta. They were going to conquer the entire Iberian Peninsula. They had only one little piece of land they didn't conquer, Granada. That was the last area to fall. And finally, the Abarbanel writes in the Hakdama of his Sfarim that when Granada fell, they committed themselves to show Hakar Satayv to their false god, that they would expel every last Jew. August 2nd, Thursday, they didn't realize it was Tisha B'Av, but heaven orchestrated that it should come out on Tisha B'Av. Why? Because they said the Jewish people will never again have a haven to build Torah, to build Judaism. We have a record of a cabin boy in Seville who his boat was leaving August 2nd, Tisha B'Av, 1492. And as his boat is leaving the dock, he's waving to 3 boats that were in the dock. The name of the 3 boats were the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria of Christopher Columbus. That voyage was paid for by Ferdinand and Isabella. Because Rebbeinu Shalom is laughing. You think the Jewish people will never have a haven to build Torah? Not only will they have a greater haven than Spain, you will fund the discovery of this country that will house more Torah than any other country that Klal Yisrael ever had in their history. That's Al Ha'etz Asher Heichen Lai. That's how Hashem runs history. The Rebbeinu Shalom orchestrates events by taking the Russia, hijacking his plans, and bringing about the results that he wants through the plan of the Russia himself. If I may, with your permission, this is something we saw in the last 100 years. You know, if you were to ask, who was the most vicious dictator in the world for the Jewish people in the last 100 years? Those who know history know that the answer is Joseph Stalin, Yimach Shemai. He killed more than 20 million of his own. You know that he had a plan I'm going to tell you about it soon. You know, he had a plan to eradicate, after Hitler destroyed the Jews of Europe, he was going to eradicate the Jews of Russia. You know, already in the 19th century, the Russian government had a systematic plan to eradicate all the Jews of Russia. They were going to kill a third, convert a third, expel a third. And millions of Jews already immigrated by the time the 20th century came. Somehow it got into Stalin's head, you know, in the War of Independence, that the Jewish people were losing the war? We were losing the war. We didn't have any ammunition. And Stalin got in his head that the Jews in Palestine, they're socialists. He didn't like the fact that the British were democratic. He figured if he supports the Jewish settlement, they'll be communist. Did you know that Stalin funded the War of Independence? If not for him, they would have fell in 1948. Maybe there wouldn't be a Mir Yeshiva today. Maybe there wouldn't be Torah in Eretz Yisrael. You know who you have to thank for that? Stalin funded the war. 5 years later, in 1953, Stalin saw that these socialists were not going to be communists. So he had an about face. He switched his mind very quickly. Stalin had trumped up charges raised against 6 doctors. This is the infamous doctors plot, where 6 doctors were convicted of medical malpractice. This was February 28th, 1953. He built railroad tracks from mainland Russia to Siberia, where he was going to take between 2 and 4 million Jews, not gas them. Siberia, the temperatures were between negative 75 and negative 95 degrees. He was going to park them there for 2 weeks, and they would die of hypothermia, chas v'shalom. This was February 28th, 1953. It's now Shabbos, Yud Gimel Adar, 1953. Rabbi Yitzchak Zilber was in a forced labor camp, and he's preparing his friends. He says, tonight is Purim. Tonight we're going to read the Megillah. And in a few days, Stalin's plan was going to go into effect to transport between 2 and 4 million Jews to Siberia. He says, look, Hashem saved the Jewish people in times of Purim from a Haman. Hashem could save us from a Stalin. And there was a Yid there, he lost it. He said, Rabbi, why are you telling us nonsense about what happened 2,500 years ago with Haman? Do you know who Stalin is? Stalin is strong like an ox. When Stalin says something, it happens. When he decrees something, it's fulfilled. He's not like a Haman. We're done. We're done. In a few days, we're all headed to Siberia. This was 7:50 p.m. Leil Purim. Rabbi Yitzchak Zilber said, Stalin is a basar v'dam. He doesn't even know what will be with him in 30 minutes. At 8:33 minutes later, Stalin, who was in perfect health, stroked out. Suddenly. You know, Stalin had a stroke. The jail guards, they didn't know what to do. Stalin is teetering life and death. By the way, Rabbi Yitzchak Zilber says he doesn't even know. If he knows Tehillim Baal Peh, it's because at that moment, he just said Tehillim, 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 Tehillim for Stalin to die. He writes, am I allowed to daven for someone to die? Yeah, I'm allowed to daven for Stalin to die. He had never learned Tehillim. He found it within himself to recite the Ganze Tehillim Baal Peh. Rabbi Yitzchak Zilber, one of the famous Russian refuseniks. Stalin died the day before the decree was set to go into effect. It started, the Yeshua happened, Purim, 1953, 72 years ago to the day. Purim 1953, a great Yeshua for Klal, one of the greatest salvations in the history of Klal Yisrael. On Purim, by the way, at the Levaya of Stalin, the second biggest Russia of the time was the president of Czechoslovakia, who was Stalin was fuming at him because he let some Jews go to Israel. Stalin was fuming at him. So to placate Stalin, the president of Czechoslovakia shot most of his administration. He went to Stalin's Levaya. He stood by the Aron, and he dropped dead on the spot. Go look it up. The president of Czechoslovakia dropped dead over the Aron of Stalin. This all was set into motion, Purim, 1953. So when Rashi tells us, Mishanichnas Adar marbin b'simcha, Yemei Nisim Hayu Yisrael. Rashi doesn't just mean back in the day Yemei Nisim. Like the Arizal says, there's an R that's Chayzer V'Nir every year during this time of the year, beginning in Adar, culminating in Purim and Pesach. These are days of Oiros, of great Nisim, Yeshuos V'Nachamos for Klal Yisrael. And therefore we hope, Be'ezus Hashem, beginning today already, we're hoping, we're anticipating, we're yearning for Yeshuos, for Nisim, for Geula, that the Rebbeinu Shalom should bring protection and great salvation for Klal Yisrael, like He did by Yom HaMahim. Be'ezus Hashem, we should all be zoicha in all of your mishpachos, in all of your families, for the whole kehillah. We shall be zoicha to see by Yom HaMahim u'vizman hazeh Yemei Nisim liYisrael.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.